Now I've opened up one of the other kits here, although really you can do this with just the body tube before anything else. And I'm going to show you a modification you can use in place of the glued in shock cord mount. And you can do this with the elastic band here. It'll work with that. And you can also use Kevlar line. Now this is 100-pound test Kevlar line. And kind of note from the package here, this is used as kite string, but we're going to use it here as a shock cord. And the nice thing about Kevlar is, one, it's very light and it's very strong, and two, it's flame resistant. By the time this stuff melts, it's almost burning, and it takes a very high temperature to do so. And so it actually holds up better over time than the elastic does. Now the drawback to this is that it's not elastic, and so you need to use a longer amount of Kevlar here. And as kind of a rule of thumb, I like to use at least 3 times the length of the rocket. And if we come back to the rocket here, we see that the length is roughly 11 inches, depending on which combination of fins you have here. And the idea here is that gives the nose cone relative to the body tube a longer distance to slow down. If we had this as short as the elastic is, it would very quickly reach the end and snap back. And the other disadvantage to this is that if it does snap back under too high of a velocity, it will pull against the body tube here and actually form what's called a zipper. It'll open this up, essentially cutting the cardboard. So if you're going to use Kevlar as a shock cord, make sure you use a long piece. Alright, so what we're going to do here is, instead of using a glue tab, which is kind of the traditional Estes method to attach this, I'm actually going to make a couple of slits here in the body tube itself, and then what we can do is glue in the shock cord here, either one of them, depending on which one you want to use. Now again, just like with the glued in mounts, we want to make sure that we're not interfering with the shoulder here. So this needs to be down here somewhere. And you can actually use the same distance that they recommend in the instructions for the glue-on tab, which is at least 1 inch down. Okay, so I'm just going to come in here, and on my mat here it'll tell me in inches right there. And what I'm doing here is I'm just going to make 2 slots here. So one little slit here that's just a little bit wider than my shock cord. And then I'm going to make another one about 5 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch down. And unfortunately, my hobby knife has lost its very tip here. There we go. Okay, and now I'm just going to indent this a little bit. I don't want to cut it, so you might want to use something a little more blunt. Use a small screwdriver here. And the idea is now just to open these holes, but also to bend in this little part of the body tube. Because what's going to happen is the shock cord is going to fit through here, and then we'll put a little bit of glue over this so that when we're finished, the glue will seal this up and also kind of level it out again. But what we're going to do now is just tuck in the end of this. Again, use something blunt so you don't cut it. I'm just going to use my screwdriver here in this case just to poke that down, and now I'm just going to gently feed this in a little at a time. Basically until I can reach it on the inside. It's not quite long enough. This is one of those things where if you have little skinny fingers, this will go a little bit faster. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to pull that up here. And I'm going to do the same thing with the other end of my shock cord here. See it down in there? Almost get it. There we go. Okay, so you just pull both ends through here. And this is what you're going to see in the final product, is that the band of the shock cord is going across these slits. And if you look at it in profile here, it's pretty close to the same level as the rest of the body tube here. And once we fill that in with glue, it'll be almost indistinguishable. Okay, so now what we need is to make sure that we've got the lower part of the shock cord here. So the shock cord that came through this part. And so you just want to pull on each end here to make sure that you've got the one you think you do. Okay, and so the bottom end of the shock cord, we're going to go back here and make our knot. Okay, and you can even take just a little dab of glue and put on here. And I would recommend doing that. I'm not going to, because this is going to be temporary. I'm going to pull it back out again. Once you've got your knot in place, then you simply gently pull this up till it reaches the end. And now we're going to take just a little bit of white glue or wood glue here and fill this area in, and then just set it aside and let that dry thoroughly before you do anything else with it. And you actually want the glue to kind of seep into the cracks a little bit here, but eventually that's going to completely immobilize this in place. And you can see that's at least as strong as the glued in tab that we had on the first Bandit. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and take this back out. And then when we come back here, I'll show you the same thing using the Kevlar. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put this on the same way that I did the elastic shock cord. Now, one of the problems with Kevlar is that when you cut it, it almost always frays at the end. And so what we can do here is, ahead of time, we're going to put a little bit of the runny type of super glue on this. Just let it soak in between the fibers here. Again, don't super glue your fingers together. But you don't need a lot of this. So you can put this on and then take a tissue or a paper towel here and just squeegee out the excess. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and measure this. So I said, I'm just, for the sake of ease, I'm just going to make a 3-foot length of this. And you probably can't see this on the camera now. But if I bring this up, my entire mat measured width is 24 inches here. And so I'm just going to stretch this across once and then come out to here. And so that gives me roughly 3 feet, or almost a meter. And you saw when I cut that there, it still frays the edges a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and seal that off with a little super glue here as well. There we go. And again, it doesn't need to be on there for very long. Okay, so this is going to go in the same way that we did with the elastic, but once we get it threaded in there, we'll treat it a little bit differently, since we don't want to just tie a knot on the end of this and hope it'll stay here. We're actually going to tie a slip knot on the inside so that it wraps completely around the cardboard there. But threading is going to be the same, so we have to thread through both of our slots. And do make sure that the super glue is dried before you do this, you'll end up gluing it to the inside of the tube. Okay, and once it's inside, this usually moves a whole lot easier than Kevlar did, or not, excuse me, the rubber did. So just keep feeding this in, and eventually it's coming out the bottom. Okay, and then what I'll do is just pull that through a good portion, and then I can just thread it back through the body tube really easily. Okay, so this end is the bottom slot. This end will be the top slot. So now I've got the ends through, and I'm just going to tie a slip knot here around this. Okay, so the actual knot is going to be on the end that's down here. And now I'm just going to pull that down taut. And just like we had with the rubber, we now have the Kevlar that's kind of down in this little indent here, and we can add some glue on top of this. Now with the Kevlar, again, this is much thinner than that elastic strap was, and so a lot more pressure is going to get applied to this. So we want to make sure that this is well glued in there. Again, white glue or carpenter's glue is fine for that. You may want to use more than one layer because as this dries, since we don't have as much bulk in here that we did with the elastic, it may sink in a bit as it dries, so you may have to put another layer or two over that until it becomes flush with the body tube again. So now I'm just going to take my glue, oh, it's very excited glue there. Okay, so that's way more glue than we actually need. So I'm just going to take and dab that in a bit. Bring off a lot of that excess. Okay, now if you need to, you can sand this after it's completely dry, but I really hate sanding, so I'm going to get as much out of this as I can. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let this dry, and then if I need to, I can add some more glue to it again to level it out. But once it's dry, then you can go ahead and do the rest of the rocket. You don't have to do this before everything else. I was just doing it in order to show this without doing a complete rocket rebuild again. And while this is drying, we'll try an experiment here and see if we can actually run the shock cord through the fin assembly. Now I've opened up the third package of the kit and taken out the assembly here. This is the orange one. For this little experiment, it doesn't really matter which one you use. So what we're going to do here is look at trying to attach a Kevlar shock cord to the fin assembly here. The advantage is by mounting it through the engine mount, which in this case is integral with the fin can here, you make a very, very strong anchor point. Now in this particular case, there's no engine mount that's actually being put in here, and so we can't use that as an anchor point. What I'm going to do instead is use this part of the fin can as my anchor point by putting two small holes in it. Now what I want to do is make sure that I'm using the sides that are not glue seams. So I've already glued this together, and so here this is one glue seam, and here this is the other glue seam. Those are going to be potential weak points already. Now in my case, I want to put my holes in the same line as a fin. And the main reason to do that is aesthetic, because probably this is going to cause a little bulge where the Kevlar is here. And if I'm going to have a little bulge, I want it to at least look like I intended it to be there. So I'm just going to make a mark here halfway down the shoulder of the fin can on that side, and I'll need another one on the opposite side here. And again, I'm trying to strike a balance between strength and aesthetics. This would be stronger if I mounted it further down, but it would also tend to bulge out along the seam that the fin can will have with the body tube, and that's not going to look as good. The further up I put it, the less bulging we'll have due to the Kevlar, but also the weaker it'll be. So by putting it about halfway up here, that gives a nice compromise. What I'm going to do now is take a small drill and drill through each side of this. And I'm not going to do this on camera, as it'll make a huge mess on my mat. All right, but when I come back, I'll show you the holes there. So I'm back with the fin can here, and you can see nicely drilled holes. And I'm going to go ahead and get the Kevlar ready here. I've measured out a 4-foot piece this time, and this is to make up for the length that is going to be stuck down in the body tube, and really doesn't contribute much to the slowing down of the nose cone and the rest of the recovery system. Okay, and once again, we're going to want to seal the edges or the ends of this with a little bit of super glue. And if you have a really splayed out end like this, once you've got the super glue on and dried, you can just cut it again and it'll give you a nice clean edge. Okay, I just did this a little bit earlier, so see, now I can take my scissors or hobby knife and cut this, and it doesn't fray. And now I'm going to pass this through like this, and so when this is done, it's going to be in this position. And now what I'm going to do is tie a knot through here, making a loop. So I'm just going to take an overhand knot Alright, success at last. Now, go ahead and just cinch this down. Okay, that's going to be really strong just the way it is. Again, if you want to be a little extra paranoid, add just a little dab of the runny super glue in here, and that'll just soak into the threads of the knot. Okay, so when this is inside the body tube, we're going to keep it stretched as we mount it so that we actually have these two equidistant sides to it. And this will help prevent some zippering. So remember I said that can happen with Kevlar if it hits an edge of a body tube and gets pulled back. By having this centered inside the body tube, that lessens the chance of that happening a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to let that super glue dry. One thing you can do to help prevent zippering is right before launch, take a piece of masking tape, find where this exits the body tube, and at that point just add kind of a little flag of masking tape here. You actually want this to be wide so that when it actually comes out of the tube, oops, bonked my camera there. So this would be strung all the way through. Alright, so you want this right here, and so now as that comes out of the tube, if the line gets pulled to the side, this provides a much wider surface area to distribute that tension, and you're less likely to zipper the tube. And then you can just change this out with every launch. Okay, now for now it's just going to be in my way, so I'm going to take this off. And I'm going to let the super glue on my knot there dry completely before we continue here. And you can either, good, I just stuck it in my fingers, there we go. And you can actually use some super glue accelerator, which is often just isopropyl alcohol, to speed that up if you want. But when we come back here, we'll go ahead and mount this to the body tube and see how it fits with the shock cord inside of it. So I went ahead and glued this together, and we do it the same way that we did for the previous rocket. Just go ahead and put a bead of super glue in here and then mount that in. The trick here is to keep some tension on this as the glue is setting. And unfortunately I had a camera here and I couldn't show you that part. Alright, but now you're looking straight down the tube, and you can see that the shock cord is equidistant from each side. So this is coming straight up the middle. And that's what we want here. For the rest of this, I'm going to go ahead and assemble it just like the instructions tell me. And from there, it's just a matter of painting and decorating it the way you want. Again, you've got this handy dandy sheet of decals to use. You can paint these, you can use markers, whatever you like. Okay, I hope these videos have been helpful to you, and I hope you have a good flight.